will follow the same pattern. He'll make cuts to essential services, whether it's in health, in education, and in other critical services which Canadians will depend on.
I think people in Ontario understand that there have been strikes at the education level against every political party who have been in office. Obviously, we hope, as we do with all labor disputes, that both sides can come to an agreement.
Tens of thousands of Ontario parents are bracing today for possible school closures tomorrow. That's because the union representing 55,000 education workers could be on strike as of Monday, unless an agreement can be reached with the provincial government today. As you heard there, it's a provincial issue, very much factoring into the federal election campaign. What could it mean for battleground Ontario? Let's ask our Sunday Power panel. In Toronto, Corey Tenaik is the former Director of Communications to Stephen Harper and the 2018 campaign manager for the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party. Here in studio, Rob Silver is a longtime political commentator and, as we always disclose, spouse of Katie Telford, senior advisor on the Liberal campaign. Kathleen Monk next to him is a former Director of Communications for Jack Layton. She's now with Earnscliffe Strategy Group. And next to me, our very own CBC Polls analyst, Eric Grenier. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Happy Sunday. So let's dig into a bit. I wanted to dig a bit deeper into the strategy in Ontario. We know this strike is looming. We know the typical sort of discussion revolves around invoking Doug Ford's name, invoking Kathleen Wynne's name. But Kathleen, let me start with you. Where your party sits right now, how key is Ontario for them? Where does the opportunity lie? Where does the challenge lie for the NDP there?
Well, the pathway to victory for all parties generally runs through Ontario. There's 124 seats there, so it's the big enchilada in terms of votes across Ontario, across the country, really. For the Democrats, obviously we had a pretty disappointing result in the 2015 election. We were wiped out of the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. So they're really looking at those former New Democrat seats that were in that urban centre. So places like Toronto Danforth, Parkdale High Park, certainly Davenport, as to return back. These are seats that traditionally turn, either Liberal or New Democrat, and to come back into the New Democratic fold. How are they doing that? Well, certainly Liberals and New Democrats are talking about Doug Ford and the negative impact he's had in the province for the same reason that Conservatives have sent Doug Ford into hiding or the Witness Protection Program, because he's outrageously unpopular in terms of the overall premier numbers across the province. He's been shown to be the premier who is least popular. And so I think that we have a lot of campaigns talking about Ford to try to leverage that unpopularity and say, you don't want to have a repeat of this, don't vote for a Conservative federal party.
Corey, I saw you shaking your head there.
Yeah, well, that's, I think, a bunch of hooey in terms of the popularity of Doug Ford. I'll predict this, that Doug Ford will have won more seats than any federal leader will win in this federal election. And I think he's got a very strong brand, but he's busy governing. And I'll also say, look, I'm his campaign manager, so obviously I have a vested interest in this. And I'll also say, because I'm his campaign manager, I don't speak for the government at all. I'm on the party side of things. So I don't have any inside knowledge as to what's going on vis-a-vis with labor negotiations or any of that. But I would point out that every provincial government in Ontario has had labor friction with the teachers' union. And that includes Kathleen Wynne, who, you couldn't imagine a premier who'd be more in the tank for the teachers' union than she was, and still had to legislate them back to work. So
let me just interrupt you for a second. Let me just ask you to take a step back beyond the merits of, and I get it, the pluses and minuses of invoking their names. Who do you think, when Justin Trudeau is invoking Doug Ford's name, when Andrew Scheer is invoking Kathleen Wynne's name, is it purely to, focus in, zone in on their base and rile them up and motivate them to turn out, or is there any other strategy behind that?
No, the strategy for the Liberals, why they're doing this, is not that Doug Ford is unpopular, it's that he's polarizing for progressive voters. And it's about trying to collapse NDP and the Green Party vote behind the Liberals. That's why he does it. It's to try to find a polarizing figure to collapse progressive votes. It's not that he's unpopular with Conservative voters or moderate voters or NDP Conservative switchers or Liberal Conservative switchers. It's about collapsing the Green Party and the NDP, and that's why they go after him.
What's the strategy for invoking Kathleen Wynne's name? Is it to motivate Conservatives?
To remind people that Kathleen Wynne's probably one of the most unsuccessful, unpopular politicians in Canadian history, who ran a government that was devastatingly ineffective and who drowned the province of Ontario in debt. There's a reason that he would invoke her. It's like invoking the most unpopular person you can think of. So it's not a surprise that he would do that.
I feel like that would be the exact same argument that Liberals would put forth, Rob,
Yeah,
about why they...
but
I just want to move over to Rob for a second.
Popular with Conservatives.
Yeah.
I think Doug Ford's more popular than the current federal Conservative Party leader.
I think the key difference, getting into an Ontario politics debate, while certainly interesting with Corey, is sort of besides the point here, though very important. I think the teacher strike has the potential to dominate the next week of the campaign. The key difference is Justin Trudeau, for better or worse, is a known brand. The same way Doug Ford was always a very known brand from his time at City Hall before he ran for office. Andrew Scheer, as we have found out in the last week, is jelly. He's putty. He's very ill-defined. As it turns out, he's part American. We didn't know that when we were here last week. We may talk about that. So when you have a provincial leader who's very well known, very polarizing, drives votes very hard, and an unknown counterpart at the federal level, it has a far greater potential to move votes. If this was Stephen Harper right now, 2015, 2019, Stephen Harper, whether you liked him or disliked him, he was a known entity by the end of his time as Prime Minister. You would not see Doug Ford having the same impact. May still be raised, may still be talked about, may still be attempted by a campaign, but I would argue it would not have the same impact, the same way that raising Kathleen Wynne at this point is that's just noise in the campaign. Doug Ford is more than noise.
So on Corey's point, though, is it to collapse is it sort of to coalesce the progressive vote?
There are a lot of voters who voted for Doug Ford a year ago who are not going to vote for Andrew Scheer right now.
Yeah,
so it is not simply...
On this, I do actually have a lot of polling information that's not privy to the rest of the public, because as a campaign manager, I do get to see all of that. And I would say that's not true.
I also have... I'm going to get Eric to weigh in a second on this.
I actually think we're agreeing on the same thing. Doug is a polarizing figure, but he's a polarizing figure for hardcore progressive voters. And the name of the game for the Liberal Party since the beginning of time has been to try to collapse NDP votes and now Green Party votes behind the Liberal Party by saying there's a big scary boogeyman over here in the Conservative Party, and we all have to put aside the blackface and the inadequacies and the costumes and all of that and vote for Justin. Otherwise, the boogeyman's going to be in charge.
Okay,
and this has been the Liberal game forever.
Okay, I just want to bring
That's what they're doing with Doug.
Eric is here. Eric, what do the polls tell you in Ontario right now?
Well, in our poll tracker, in the average, we do still have the Liberals leading in Ontario by about 6 points. And I think the broader question you can look at where the Conservatives are nationwide, they're doing better in places like Quebec, they're doing better in places like Atlantic Canada, in BC, than they did in 2015. One of the places where they're doing worse is in Ontario. Now, that could be a coincidence, but we have seen some polls that have suggested that out of all of the provinces, Ontarians are the ones who are most likely to say what's happening at the provincial level is impacting how they're viewing the federal race. So I think that the simple fact that Jason Kenney is campaigning in Ontario and Doug Ford is not. Jason Kenney is also a busy premier who has a province to run. I think that says more. I think that's pretty much lays it out why the Conservatives don't want to be seen on the same stage with Doug Ford.
I just want to add on Corey's point that there is a well-worn tactic of the Liberals to use a Conservative boogeyman to collapse left and progressive voters. He's right on that. They use it every election, right? From Paul Martin, you can trace it all the way through. That said, I think the salient point for viewers in watching this and looking at the strategy and how the Liberals are rolling this out is that it is significant how early they've rolled that tactic out in this campaign and how consistently.
Doug Ford. But it was in the months even prior to the campaign.
But also the scary boogeyman idea, right? And how they're ramping it up. So Doug Ford, no, certainly Doug Ford mentioned started in much earlier in the spring. Third parties got involved in framing up that discussion. But the point is that it is so early, and I think it's a result of the fact they've had to pull out this hammer so early and out of their toolkit because of the blackface revelation.
So what do you then, Rob, expect over the next 2 weeks? Like, how central is Ontario to the plan? Do you imagine of every party, the strategy of every party, and how do you expect that?
I think that if you look at the past week for Andrew Scheer in Quebec, there was a path to victory for him. And it's hard to remember at this point where him making significant gains in Quebec I can't predict the future, but I think the likelihood of that happening at this point looks far more remote, meaning the path to victory, whether it's a minority or a majority government for the Conservatives, has to pass through the Ontario. But saying Ontario is a big province, and it's a bit of lazy shorthand just saying Ontario. If you told me one number, which is what is the vote total on election night in the 905, I think I could pretty accurately tell you who's in power and whether it's a majority or minority government. So it's not just the province. It's I could give you a list. I probably won't do it on TV of 10 or 12 seats. And if you told me who won those seats, I'd have a pretty good sense on how the night went more broadly. So I think you're going to see Andrew Scheer spending a lot of time there, which is why the Doug Ford factor is awkward and why the potential for teacher strikes, specifically the Peel Region Board, the York Region Board, like it's not just a theoretical strike. It's not some small school board. This is right in the heart of where if he wants to be Prime Minister, he needs to win seats. There are going to be a lot of angry parents on Monday morning if they have to take the day off school because of Doug Ford.
Corey, I'll give you the last word on this segment. I'll just point out that those discussions are happening right now.
Do you know what the ultimate verification of sort of the sham that is the campaign the Liberals are running on this and the weakness of the campaign is that they have to campaign against somebody who is not even on the ballot. And Doug's not on the ballot. Doug Ford is running a province and trying to do a good job at that, and also tell you this. So give you, we'll have more say on this later. Doug is quite popular in the 905. And I'll bet you this, Doug Ford will be reelected with another majority government. But the attempt to campaign against him is a distraction. And it's a sign of the weakness, I think, of the Liberal campaign. And I think it's almost a trope, the attempt to try to polarize against a boogeyman, in this case one that's not even on the ballot, to try to collapse progressive voters behind what is a very weak Liberal leader.
Yeah, I get the arguments back and forth. I'm just interested in whether they'll work.